She moved quickly across the restaurant floor, her shoes making soft sounds against the worn wooden boards. The place was busy, as it usually was, with people chatting, laughing, and the occasional clinking of cutlery. She balanced a tray filled with drinks, careful not to spill anything, glancing at the guests with a polite smile. Some nodded in acknowledgement, some barely noticed her at all. She had grown used to being invisible in this world. Being a waitress was not glamorous. It was tiring, sometimes frustrating, and often thankless. But it kept her going. It helped pay the bills, helped keep a roof over her head, and sometimes, just sometimes, allowed her a small moment of quiet reflection when the restaurant slowed down. No one knew much about her, really. She rarely spoke about herself. She did not join in on the chatter with coworkers beyond polite greetings. She carried herself lightly, as if trying not to take up too much space. She had a routine, a rhythm that she followed every single day. The morning rush, the lunch crowd, the quiet lull in the afternoon, and then the dinner rush. It was predictable, and yet it was exhausting. Every day she arrived, donned her uniform, tied her hair back, became part of the moving, breathing machinery of the restaurant. But there was something more to her, something hidden under the layers of aprons and trays. From the corner of her eye, she often glanced at the piano tucked into the far side of the dining room. It was old and polished, yet no one seemed to pay much attention to it. The restaurant had placed it there years ago for decoration, a kind of elegant touch that no one really used. She had noticed it the very first day she started working here, and from that day on, it had always drawn her gaze. She could see the keys, black and white, shining faintly under the lights. She had not played in years, not in public at least. But her hands would sometimes twitch almost unconsciously, reaching for the imagined keys. She could almost feel the music in her fingertips, the memory of long nights spent practicing. The weight of melodies she had once known by heart. Her life had not always been about serving food and drinks. Once, she had dreams that were bigger than this room. Music had been her world. She had studied piano since she was very young, spending hours at home, practicing scales and pieces until her fingers ached. She had entered small competitions, performed at school events, and her teachers had told her she had real talent. People had listened, had smiled at her performances, had praised her skill. Music had been her escape, her joy, and her pride. But life had a way of changing everything. Her family had faced hardships, bills had piled up, and she had been forced to make choices that took her further from the piano and closer to survival. Dreams of concerts and recognition faded into evenings spent preparing meals, cleaning tables, and keeping up with the endless demands of a job that never ended. She did not complain. She had learned early on that complaining did not fill empty stomachs or pay rent. She simply learned to adjust, to carry her quiet sadness with her like an old coat. Yet the music never truly left her. It lingered in the small moments when she could allow herself to breathe. When the rush was over, when the last customer left for the night, she would sometimes stand near the piano and imagine herself playing. Her fingers would hover over the keys, moving in the air as if the piano was there just for her. She would close her eyes and hear the notes, clear and beautiful, echoing in the empty restaurant. It was her secret world, a place where she could be fully herself without judgment, without anyone looking at her as just a waitress. During the busy hours, though, she had to be alert. Orders needed to be taken, drinks delivered, tables cleared, smiles maintained. The guests were often too wrapped up in their own lives to notice her at all, and she had learned to blend into the background. Some days, that invisibility felt like a relief. She could move through the crowd unnoticed, unseen, almost like she was part of the shadows. Other days, it weighed on her, a reminder that the person she had once been, the person who had performed on stages and held the applause of others, was tucked away behind a uniform and apron. The restaurant had its regulars. A few customers always came at the same time, ordering the same meals, and they knew her by face, if not by name. Occasionally, someone would try to make conversation, asking about her day or complimenting her efficiency. She would answer politely, with small words and a soft tone, careful not to reveal too much. She had learned that people rarely wanted to know the full story. They wanted service, a smile, perhaps a little charm, and back to their own lives. Her coworkers, too, had their routines. Some were friendly, joking, and sharing stories about their days. Others were competitive, watching for mistakes, always ready to point out when someone faltered. She navigated it all quietly, careful to keep her distance while still doing her work well. She had earned a reputation for reliability. Managers trusted her. Customers rarely complained. She moved efficiently, never spilling, never making errors. And yet, she remained almost invisible in the eyes of the world around her. And still, the piano called to her. There were nights when she would find herself standing beside it, imagining the melodies she used to play, remembering the way the notes felt under her fingers, the way the music could make hearts stir. She imagined the sounds carrying through the restaurant, reaching ears that were ready to listen, even if only for a moment. She had not shared this part of herself with anyone. She was afraid, perhaps, that the world would not be ready to hear her. Or maybe she feared that once she began, she could not stop. Music, after all, had a way of taking over everything once it was released. One evening, during a slow moment when most of the guests had left and only a few sat lingering with drinks in hand, she paused at the piano. Her hands hovered over the keys, and she could feel the old excitement returning. She remembered the first time she had played in front of a crowd. The nerves, the exhilaration, the way the applause had felt like warmth flowing through her chest. That feeling had not gone away. It had simply been buried under years of responsibility and necessity. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to imagine playing again, to let the music fill the air in the quiet restaurant, even without touching the keys. She could feel the rhythm building inside her, the melodies forming in her mind. It was almost like breathing for her, natural and essential. She knew that the piano had the power to change a room, to make people pause, to reach into hearts. She had seen it happen before, and she knew it could happen again. The thought made her both nervous and excited. She had not played for anyone in years. What if she was forgotten? What if the notes stumbled? What if no one appreciated it anymore? Still, the pull was irresistible. She lingered by the piano, taking deep breaths, feeling the wood beneath her fingers even before they touched the keys. The restaurant hummed around her, the air thick with the smells of food and coffee, the gentle background music playing over the speakers. It was a familiar world, one she knew well. But her mind drifted to the piano, the sound she could create if only she allowed herself to try. She often thought about the moments when she had been recognized for her talent, the pride in the faces of her teachers and family. Life had moved on, circumstances had changed. But that part of Hertha, part that could coax music from silence, had never left. It was waiting, patient and quiet, for a moment like this. A moment when the world might finally notice, when she could step out of invisibility, even if just for a few notes. And so she stood there, hands poised above the keys, feeling the pulse of the restaurant around her, and wondered if this night could be the night she remembered who she truly was. The thought alone brought a small secret smile to her lips. She was a waitress to the world, yes, but she was also something more, something powerful, something that no tray, no uniform, no busy restaurant floor could ever take away. She was a musician, and the piano, silent and waiting, seemed to acknowledge her presence with a faint, gleaming welcome. It was a quiet anticipation, a breath held before something beautiful could unfold. She did not know if she would ever play in front of anyone again, but for now, standing there, feeling the keys beneath her fingertips, even without pressing them, she remembered that her music had never truly left her, and that memory, soft and persistent, was enough to carry her through the night, through her shifts, and through the invisible world she navigated every single day. Her mind often drifted back to the years before she became a waitress, to the days when music was not just a secret but her entire world. She remembered the first time she sat at a piano, how the keys felt under her small, eager fingers, and how each note seemed to have a life of its own. She could lose herself for hours, playing simple melodies at first, then moving on to more complex pieces as her skill grew. The piano was a friend she could talk to without words, a companion who always understood her. At home, the small living room often echoed with the sounds of her practice, and she would imagine herself performing in grand halls. Lights shining, applause filling the space. Her family had recognized her talent early on. They encouraged her to practice, to attend lessons, and to take part in competitions. For a while, it had felt like the world was opening its arms to her, like she could reach for something greater than the ordinary life surrounding her. She was young, filled with hope, and the piano seemed to promise endless possibilities. Teachers would praise her technique, telling her that her playing had soul. It could move people in ways words never could. Every compliment, every acknowledgement became a part of her identity, shaping her dreams. But life rarely follows a straight path. Circumstances began to shift, slowly at first, then with sudden intensity. There were medical bills that needed attention, family members who required care, unexpected expenses that could not be ignored. Her dreams of concerts and competitions did not vanish overnight, but they began to retreat into the background, making room for survival. Music remained in her heart, but the piano became a luxury she could not always afford to pursue. She had to focus on the practical, the immediate. Still, she did not give up entirely. In the quiet moments at home, when the house was still and the world felt distant, she would return to the piano, sometimes for a few minutes, sometimes for hours. She remembered the sensation of her fingers gliding over the keys, the thrill of discovering new combinations of sounds, the quiet satisfaction of completing a piece from memory. Those moments were private, fragile, and precious. They reminded her that despite all the responsibilities and challenges, a part of her remained untamed, alive and free. School had been a different world altogether. Some classmates had admired her talent, while others were indifferent. She was not always the most outgoing, preferring the company of music to the chatter of peers. There were moments of loneliness, when she watched others play games or attend parties, and felt the pull of a life she could not fully join. Music was her comfort, her escape, and her shield. It taught her discipline, patience, and the joy of creating something beautiful from nothing. Her teachers had been more than instructors. They were guides who nurtured her abilities. They would push her to practice harder, to refine her technique, to explore emotions through sound. She absorbed their lessons eagerly, understanding that music was not just about notes and rhythms, but about connection. Every time she performed for them, she felt a sense of pride, of recognition, that no grade or trophy could ever fully capture. She was not just learning to play. She was learning to communicate, to express herself in a language beyond words. But with adulthood came new responsibilities. Family expectations, financial pressures, and practical necessities began to overshadow her ambitions. The piano that once dominated her days became a backdrop, a silent witness to a life increasingly consumed by work. She took odd jobs, part-time work, anything that would help keep things together. Each role demanded attention, energy, and time, leaving little room for the artistry she had once embraced fully. Yet, even when she was exhausted from long shifts, even when her hands ached from carrying trays and plates, she would think of music. It was a quiet, persistent pulse beneath her daily routine, reminding her that she was more than her circumstances. There were moments when she wondered what might have been. She imagined herself performing in elegant halls, hearing the applause, seeing the faces of strangers moved by her music. She pictured herself walking on stage, poised and confident, her fingers dancing across the keys, and the room responding as if it had been waiting for her all along. Those thoughts were bittersweet, filled with longing, but also with determination. She could not go back, could not undo the choices life had required, but she could carry that spark forward in ways that were possible, even within the limitations of her current life. Sometimes, she would reflect on the sacrifices she had made. There were friends she had lost touch with, social opportunities she had declined, and nights spent alone practicing in secret while others went out. Music had been demanding, but it had also been generous, giving her purpose, beauty, and a sense of identity. She remembered how it felt to be recognized for her skill, how it felt to connect with others through sound alone. Those memories were treasures she could revisit any time. Keeping the fire of her passion alive, her private world of music often intersected subtly with her present life. She would hum softly while serving tables, her mind running through melodies that no one around her noticed. Sometimes she would tap lightly on surfaces, imagining they were piano keys, creating rhythms that made her feel grounded and alive. Even in the busiest moments when the restaurant was noisy and chaotic, she found small ways to keep her music present, a reminder that she had not lost herself entirely. One particular memory stood out vividly. She had been 10 years old, performing in a small school recital. Her hands had been nervous, shaking slightly, but as soon as she touched the keys, a calm washed over her. The music flowed naturally, as if it had always belonged to her. When she finished, the audience had erupted in applause, and she had felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. That feeling, the combination of fear, focus, and joy, had stayed with her ever since. It was a benchmark, a reminder of what she could do when she allowed herself to fully engage with her gift, even as she moved further away from a professional music path. That benchmark remained. She had learned to live with compromise, but she never abandoned her identity as a musician. It was a quiet rebellion against the world's insistence that she'd be only a waitress. It's only a worker, only someone practical and invisible. Music gave her freedom, and she carried that freedom silently, like a secret treasure that no one could take away. She often thought about what it would be like to share her music again. To have someone truly listen, to see their reactions, and know that she had reached them. But fear lingered, fear of judgment, fear that she was no longer capable, fear that the world had moved on without her. Those fears were not always strong, but they were persistent. Whispering that the piano was a luxury she could not afford to indulge, yet the desire was stronger. The pull of creativity and expression unyielding, even her current life sometimes offered glimpses of that dream. Occasionally, a customer would comment on the piano, asking if anyone ever played it. She would smile softly, deflect the question, and move on, her heart fluttering at the thought of what could happen if she allowed herself to play. There was a part of her that longed for that moment. The moment when her fingers would finally touch the keys in front of others, and the music would remind the world who she really was. In the quiet of her apartment, she sometimes practiced mentally, imagining herself at the piano. Her fingers would move in the air, tracing familiar patterns, playing pieces she had memorized long ago. She would imagine the sound filling the room, soft at first, then growing louder, more confident. She could feel the emotions of each note, the way music could carry sorrow, joy, hope, and longing simultaneously. Even in solitude, she experienced the full richness of what she had once shared with others, and it was enough to keep her spirit alive. Her life as a waitress and her life as a musician were two worlds that coexisted quietly, sometimes clashing, sometimes harmonizing. She had learned to navigate both, finding small moments where they could intersect. She had developed patience, resilience, and the ability to observe carefully, skills that served her well in her job but also in her approach to music. Every table served, every tray balanced, every polite smile offered to strangers was part of her rhythm, a subtle preparation for a day when she might finally perform again. She never stopped hoping. Hope was a quiet companion, sometimes flickering, sometimes steady, but always present. It reminded her that her story was not over, that the piano was not forgotten, and that the world might one day hear the music she had carried in her heart all these years. Until that moment, she continued her work, moving through the restaurant with skill and grace, serving with efficiency, and maintaining the polite invisibility that life demanded. But inside, she remained a musician, alive with melodies that no one yet knew. The past was never far away. She remembered the teachers who had believed in her, the competitions where she had performed, the quiet nights spent alone at the piano when the world felt distant and small. Those memories were not sad. They were fuel, reminders of her capability, her passion, and her persistence. She had learned that talent alone was not enough. Fit needed opportunity, courage, and sometimes a leap of faith, and she waited patiently for the chance to leap again. Even now, she would occasionally stand near the piano in the restaurant, letting her fingers hover above the keys. She could feel the notes, feel the stories they could tell, feel the way they could reach into the hearts of strangers. It was a subtle practice, one that no one noticed, but it kept her connected to the person she truly was. The waitress and the musician existed side by side, each informing the other, each shaping her in ways both seen and unseen. She had learned to accept compromise without surrendering hope. Life had not allowed her to pursue music fully, but it had given her strength, resilience, and a quiet understanding of the world. She had learned that beauty could exist even in small moments, that art could be carried within, waiting for a chance to bloom. And that knowledge sustained her, giving her a sense of purpose and identity that no job, no expectation, no circumstance could ever fully take away. It was a quiet evening at the restaurant. The dinner rush had mostly ended, leaving only a few lingering guests scattered across tables. The air smelled faintly of coffee and the remnants of meals. Mixed with the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional clink of a glass, she moved among the tables as usual, collecting plates and refilling water. Expression calm, professional, but with a subtle tension under the surface. There was something different in the air tonight, though she could not put her finger on it. Perhaps it was the quiet itself, or perhaps it was the way the room seemed to breathe differently, almost as if it were waiting for something. The piano sat in its usual corner, gleaming faintly under the soft overhead lights. She glanced at it briefly as she passed, her fingers brushing against the edge of a table for support. For a moment, her mind wandered, imagining her hands on the keys, the music flowing, the notes alive. She shook her head slightly, forcing herself to focus. Tonight was just another shift, another evening where she would serve, smile, and move on. That had always been enough. But the moment arrived unexpectedly. A customer at one of the tables asked a casual question that set something in motion. "Does anyone ever play that piano?" he said, nodding toward the corner. She froze for a second, heart beating slightly faster than normal. She gave a polite, almost automatic smile. "Not usually, sir. It's mostly for decoration," she replied softly. The words felt strange in her mouth because they were not entirely true. Music lived in her, and she had imagined playing here countless times. She wondered if she should say more, but the thought was quickly pushed aside. It was too soon, too risky, too vulnerable. The customer looked disappointed but did not press further. She moved to the next table, clearing glasses and refilling drinks, her mind buzzing. The question lingered, like a spark in dry grass. She could feel the pull, the familiar tug of something she had carried for years. The piano was calling, quietly but insistently, as it always had. She took a deep breath and tried to focus on her work, but every step she took seemed to bring her closer to the corner where the piano waited. A few minutes later, another unexpected moment occurred. The restaurant manager, noticing the slow pace, commented casually to the staff that they should consider playing some live music to keep the atmosphere lively. No one volunteered immediately. The suggestion floated in the air, a small, harmless idea, but it planted a seed in her mind. Her hands froze on the tray she was carrying. Her stomach fluttered. Could it be possible? Could tonight be the night she allowed herself to play again? She hesitated, glancing around the room. Guests were quietly chatting, some looking down at their phones, others simply enjoying the calm after dinner. No one seemed to notice her inner struggle. Her co-workers were busy with their own tasks, unaware of the storm building quietly inside her. She took another deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. This was a moment she had dreamed about for years, imagined countless times in solitude. And now, unexpectedly, it was within reach. Slowly, almost tentatively, she approached the piano. Her hands hovered above the keys, a mix of fear and excitement coursing through her. She remembered every lesson, every practice session, every late-night performance in front of imaginary audiences. The memories flowed into her, filling her with both confidence and doubt. What if she made mistakes? What if the music did not sound as she remembered? What if people judged her? These thoughts swirled, but beneath them was a stronger, quieter force, the desire to play, to share, to be heard. She pressed the first key lightly, testing the sound. The note rang out clearly, pure and bright. Her heart skipped a beat. She tried another, and another, each note bringing a rush of familiarity and joy. The music felt alive beneath her fingers, a living thing that had been waiting patiently for her all these years. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to be fully present, letting the rhythm and melody guide her movements. It was as if the restaurant faded away, leaving only her and the piano, connected in a private world of sound and emotion. As the music grew, something remarkable happened. The room once filled with casual conversation and the gentle clatter of dishes began to change. People paused mid-sentence, glasses lifted halfway to mouths, and all eyes slowly turned toward her. No one had expected this. The quiet, unassuming waitress, invisible for so long, was filling the space with music that demanded attention. The notes floated and danced, soft at first, then stronger, richer, more confident. Guests exchanged surprised glances, whispers of curiosity spreading quietly from table to table. Her fingers moved with precision and grace, guided by years of memory and passion. She had not performed publicly in so long, yet every note was instinctive, every phrase natural. She played with emotion, letting the music carry her feelings, her longing, her joy, and her courage. The piano, once just a decoration, became a conduit for expression, transforming the atmosphere entirely. The restaurant no longer felt like a casual dining space. It felt like a concert hall, alive with resonance and attention. Some guests were visibly moved, leaning forward, eyes closed, letting the music wash over them. Others watched in astonishment, unsure of how to react, realizing that they had underestimated the quiet woman they had seen serving drinks and meals without a thought. Her presence, once unnoticed, now commanded attention. And every note she played reinforced her existence, her talent, her story. She was no longer invisible. The music seemed to change the people around her. Conversations had stopped, replaced by silence, awe, and wonder. A few people took out their phones, recording the moment, their hands slightly trembling with excitement. The atmosphere was electric yet intimate, as though the restaurant itself had been waiting for this expression of beauty. She could feel their attention, not as pressure, but as connection, a shared experience that transcended ordinary interactions. With each piece she played, her confidence grew. The hesitation and fear that had accompanied her initial touch of the keys dissolved, replaced by focus and joy. She allowed herself to fully immerse in the music, exploring nuances, dynamics, and emotions she had not felt in years. The room responded naturally, the guests leaning in, captivated by the unexpected brilliance. The manager, standing quietly nearby, watched with astonishment. Realizing that something extraordinary was unfolding before him, even her co-workers were drawn in, stopping their tasks to watch, silently cheering. And marveling at the transformation, the woman who had moved among them quietly, professionally, without drawing attention to herself, had revealed a depth and talent that no one had suspected. They exchanged looks of disbelief, understanding now that they had witnessed something rare, something remarkable. It was a reminder that people are often far more than what they seem, that hidden talents can remain unnoticed for years until the right moment brings them to light. As the performance continued, she began to experiment, letting improvisation flow naturally. She explored emotions she had held in silence for years: longing, sadness, hope. Joyanne, the music carried them, unspoken yet understood by everyone listening. Tears glimmered in the eyes of some guests, smiles appeared on others. And the quiet awe of the moment created a shared connection that transcended age, background, or status. For a brief time, the restaurant became more than a dining space. It became a place of shared humanity, united by the unexpected power of music. She lost track of time. Minutes felt like seconds, and seconds stretched into what seemed like eternity. She was fully present, fully herself, and fully alive. Every note was intentional, every pause meaningful, every crescendo a statement of her being. The piano, once a silent observer of her life, now sang through her, carrying the story of her past, her dreams, and her perseverance. She realized that this was more than a performance. It was a declaration, a reclaiming of a part of herself that had been hidden for too long. As the last notes faded, the room remained silent for a heartbeat, as if no one could bring themselves to break the spell. Then, slowly applause began, first tentative, then stronger, filling the space with warmth and appreciation. She opened her eyes, finally seeing the faces around her, the looks of surprise, admiration, and joy. For the first time in a long while, she felt fully seen. The quiet waitress, the invisible worker, had revealed the music within her, and the room had responded with the recognition she had longed for all these years. The manager approached, a smile on his face, words of praise, ready but almost unnecessary in the wake of what had just happened. Guests lingered, asking questions, wanting to know more about her story, about the woman who had transformed their evening with something so pure and unexpected. She felt a mixture of pride, relief, and exhilaration. The piano had given her a voice, and through it, she had spoken in a way that no words could ever capture. That night marked a turning point. Something fundamental had shifted, not just in the room, but in her. She had remembered who she was, reclaimed a part of herself that had been waiting patiently, and shared it with a world that had never truly looked for it. The experience was humbling, powerful, and unforgettable. She returned to her duties with a quiet smile, knowing that her life had changed, even if subtly, forever. And even as she cleared the last table and prepared to leave, her mind lingered on the piano, the music, and the extraordinary moment she had created. She knew that this was just the beginning, that the spark ignited tonight could grow, and that the world might yet hear her fully. For the first time in a long time, she felt hope, not as a distant dream, but as something real, something tangible, and something within reach. The moment she played that first note, the restaurant had changed. But as she continued, the transformation deepened. It was no longer just music filling the air, or it was an energy, a presence, something that shifted the entire space. Guests stopped, looking at their phones, stopped talking, and turned fully toward her. She could feel their attention, not intrusive, not demanding, but warm and expectant. They were listening, truly listening, and it was as if her music had become a language that spoke directly to their hearts. Her fingers moved effortlessly across the keys. Years of training, years of passion, and years of suppressed longing converged in a single flow. She was no longer thinking about perfection or mistakes. She was thinking only of expression, of letting the music carry everything she had ever felt, the joy, the frustration, the hope, the despair. Every note was intentional, every pause deliberate, every crescendo a story of her life. She played as if the piano had been waiting for this moment as much as she had. Guests began to react in ways she had only imagined in her dreams. A mother, sitting with her child, wiped tears from her eyes quietly, moved by the gentle sadness in a particular passage. A couple near the back smiled at each other, holding hands as the notes wrapped around them, reconnecting them in a way that the usual chatter of a restaurant never could. A man in the corner, usually stern and impatient, leaned forward, letting the music soften the lines of worry on his face. Every person in the room seemed to be touched in their own way, and she felt the connection, felt the shared experience that she had once dreamed of creating on stages. It's much grander than this humble restaurant. Her coworkers were equally astonished. They had seen her as quiet, professional, reliable, but they had never imagined this level of talent hidden beneath the apron and tray. One by one, they stopped their tasks, standing silently at a distance, watching in awe. They had always known. She was good, competent, efficient, but this was different. This was not competence. This was art, and it demanded recognition. Some of them exchanged whispers, barely audible, wondering how they could have overlooked her all this time. The waitress they had walked past 100 times had suddenly become the center of their attention, the source of beauty and emotion that they had never expected to witness in their everyday environment. The manager, standing nearby, felt a mixture of pride and disbelief. He had always known her as a hard-working employee, dependable and quiet. But seeing her play, witnessing the room fall silent in rapt attention, filled him with admiration he could hardly contain. He realized that he had underestimated her, just as everyone else had. There was something extraordinary happening here, something that no one had predicted. It was happening because she had allowed herself to step forward, to claim the space that had been hers all along. The music continued, flowing effortlessly from one piece to another. She moved seamlessly between slow, emotional melodies and faster, more intricate passages. Each transition was smooth, natural, almost effortless, and the room seemed to respond, as if it had been waiting for her to find the perfect rhythm. Guests leaned in, some closing their eyes, some tapping their feet lightly to the beat. There was laughter in the air, soft and spontaneous, as people connected to the joy of the music. There was silence, too, heavy and profound as the deeper emotions of her pieces washed over them. She noticed small, subtle things in the audience that made her heart swell. A young girl sitting near the front was wide-eyed, fascinated, watching her hands move across the keys as if trying to memorize every motion. An older couple exchanged glances, whispering quietly, their eyes glistening with unspoken emotion. A man with a camera in his hand hesitated, then put it down, realizing that some moments could not be captured fully, they had to be felt. Each reaction reminded her of the power of music, of how it could bridge the gap between strangers, touch souls, and create moments of shared humanity. The piano became an extension of herself. She felt every note in her bones, every chord in her chest. It was as if the music was alive, a living entity that breathed through her, guiding her fingers, shaping the experience for everyone present. She lost track of time, forgetting the restaurant, forgetting the work, forgetting the years of waiting and doubt. All that mattered was this moment, this connection, this expression of a life that had been quietly waiting for recognition. Some guests began to whisper among themselves, unable to contain their admiration. "She's incredible," one said softly. "I've never heard anything like this," another replied. The words spread quietly through the room, creating a wave of awe that matched the music. People began to realize that they had misjudged her, that the quiet waitress they had seen serving drinks and plates had a depth and talent that went far beyond their expectations. The contrast was stark, almost startling. She had moved from invisibility to center stage in a matter of minutes, and the room had responded with the recognition she had always deserved. The improvisation came naturally now. She allowed herself to play freely, exploring emotions she had long held in silence. The music reflected her journey, the struggles, the sacrifices, the quiet hope, and the persistent dream of recognition. Each note carried a story, each phrase a chapter of her life. The audience responded intuitively, feeling the narrative without words. There was laughter, there were tears, there were moments of quiet reflection. It was as if the piano had become a translator for emotions that could not be spoken aloud, and she was the vessel carrying the message. Even the restaurant staff, who had initially thought of her as just another colleague, began to see her in a new light. They realized that talent could be hidden in plain sight, that quiet people often carried worlds within them that were invisible until the right moment. Some watched with admiration, some with humility, and all with a renewed sense of respect. She had reminded them that the ordinary often conceals the extraordinary, and that everyone has a story worth noticing if one only looks closely enough. She continued to play, her energy and confidence growing with every note. The room seemed to vibrate with life, each guest contributing silently to the collective experience. The air was thick with emotion, palpable and real, and she felt herself lifted by it. She was no longer just playing. She was creating, sharing, and transforming the environment around her. It was a rare kind of magic, one that could not be forced or manufactured. It came only from truth, authenticity, and courage, the courage to reveal herself fully, without hesitation. Time seemed suspended. Minutes stretched into a timeless flow, each note lingering in the air, resonating long after it was played. She explored the depth of her abilities, moving between delicate passages and powerful chords, experimenting with dynamics and rhythm. Every variation brought a different response from the audience. Some swayed gently, some closed their eyes, some whispered to each other in awe. The room, once ordinary and predictable, had become a living, breathing entity, shaped by her music and the emotions it evoked. She glanced briefly at the manager, who nodded encouragingly, eyes wide with pride. Even in a professional setting where praise was often limited to work efficiency or punctuality, he could not hide his astonishment. She had created something extraordinary, something that went beyond mere performance. She had transformed the space, elevated the moment, reminded everyone present that art has the power to change perspectives, to open hearts, and to inspire wonder. Guests began to lean closer to the piano, drawn instinctively to the source of the beauty surrounding them. The young girl near the front mimicked her hand movements with invisible fingers, fascinated by the speed and accuracy of each motion. An elderly man tapped his foot softly, as if letting the rhythm remind him of his youth. Couples held hands. Strangers exchanged smiles, and a quiet, shared sense of humanity filled the room. Music, she realized, was not just entertainment, it was connection, understanding, and empathy made audible. She was aware of the impact she was having, but she did not let it distract her. Every note, every chord, every pause was deliberate. She felt the audience not as pressure but as a mirror, reflecting back the emotions she was pouring into the music. The piano had become a bridge between her inner world and the external reality of the restaurant, connecting hearts and minds in a way that words never could. She realized with quiet satisfaction that she had achieved something she had longed for years: recognition, connection, and the freedom to express herself fully. By the time she reached the final piece, the room was completely transformed. The air was thick with appreciation, the glow of astonishment in people's eyes unmistakable. Guests were leaning forward, silent but attentive, hanging on every note. The manager had forgotten to check orders or schedules, completely absorbed in the performance. Her co-workers stood respectfully, knowing they had witnessed something extraordinary, a moment that would linger in their memories long after the restaurant returned to normal. As the last chord faded, there was a heartbeat of silence. The room held its breath, suspended in the beauty of what had just unfolded. And then slowly, applause began. Tentative at first, then growing, filling the room with warmth, admiration, and a sense of shared wonder. The sound was not just appreciation for skill. It was recognition of courage, authenticity, and the long-suppressed talent that had finally been allowed to shine. She opened her eyes, meeting the gaze of the audience. And for the first time in years, she felt fully seen, fully acknowledged. Fully alive, her hands hovered above the keys, trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from the intensity of the moment. She had stepped into a world that had always seemed out of reach, and now she had left her mark on it. The restaurant, once ordinary and predictable, had become a place of magic, emotion, and shared humanity. The quiet waitress, invisible for so long, had revealed the extraordinary depths of her soul, and everyone present had felt it. That night, she understood something essential. Talent, passion, and courage could transform even the most ordinary spaces. The piano, once a silent decoration, had become a vessel for expression, connection, and recognition. And she, the woman who had served quietly for years, had become something far greater than anyone had imagined. The night had ended, but its echo lingered in the restaurant. Guests left slowly, some whispering among themselves, still replaying the unexpected concert they had just witnessed. The music, the performance, the sheer presence of the woman they had once overlooked lingered in their minds. Even after the last table was cleared, the energy of the evening seemed to remain, subtle but undeniable. Like the fading notes of a song that continue to vibrate long after the keys have been lifted, she moved among the tables, collecting plates and cups, but her movements were different now. She felt lighter, freer, more visible than she had in years. The applause, the awe, the recognition, it all swirled in her mind. A reminder that she was more than the quiet, efficient waitress everyone had assumed her to be. For the first time in a long time, she felt the weight of invisibility lift. She could still do her job, still serve food and drinks, but now she carried herself differently. Her steps had a quiet confidence, her smile a subtle pride, and her mind a renewed sense of possibility. Her co-workers were buzzing softly among themselves, still astonished by what they had witnessed. They had seen her every day, yet they had never really seen her. Now they looked at her with new eyes, admiration replacing the casual indifference that had existed before. A few whispered words of congratulations, tentative at first, then more openly, expressing how amazed they were by her talent. Some of them seemed almost embarrassed, realizing they had misjudged her, underestimated her, and missed the depth of skill and passion she carried quietly for years. The manager approached her, a mixture of pride and excitement in his eyes. I didn't know you could play like that," he said softly, almost in disbelief. "That was incredible. You've been hiding this talent all this time?" She smiled a little shyly, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "Yes, I guess I've always played quietly," she admitted. It was true. She had kept her gift private, reserved for late nights, for silent practice, for dreams she did not dare share. Yet tonight, it had been released, and the response had been overwhelming.